Hello, everybody. I'm Pontius, and welcome back to Unexpected Awesome. When it comes to media franchises, there are very few that come close to the prestige, presence, as well as just sheer volume of that of Godzilla. Starting off in 1954 as a grim and horrifying walking nuclear apocalypse brought about by mankind's uninhibited scientific ambitions to bend nature to its will, across the nearly 7 decades the iconic dragon has been curb-stomping his way through cinema. He's been everything from uncompromisingly evil heel to the nation of Japan, all the way to its anti-heroic defender of its lands, with films of almost every single variety or capability that you can do with a giant monster in between. However, if there's any more obvious element to Toho's franchise's success other than the sheer scale and spectacle of it all, I'd argue that it's the setup they have of the various rival monsters that they've created to oppose Godzilla to facilitate the glory of his conquests and exploits. These include everything from tri-headed space-conquering dragons all the way to nigh alchemically produced crustacean satans. However, I would argue his greatest rival is in his mechanical clone Mechagodzilla. Starting off as a walking missile boat of blitzkrieging destruction to take over the world by space alien gorillas, he himself across the nearly 5 decades since then would have as shifting and as versatile an identity inside of these movies as Godzilla himself, being everything from weapon of conquest to corporate stooge, all the way to the subject of today's review, that being of a dragon-shaped mechanized Excalibur of the Japanese nation. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is possibly the single most underrated Godzilla film from its single most underrated era, that being the Millennium Era. It's effectively a 2003 live-action mech drama, centered around how the nation of Japan desperately organizes, designs, builds, and deploys a cyborg mecha to face off a marauding new Godzilla that perpetually threatens it off of its own shores. And at the center of it all is a driven and dutiful pilot by the name of Akane, whom on the very first night that the new Godzilla lands ground and lays waste to the cities of Japan, accidentally in a screw-up on her attempted to retreat, knocks her commanding officer's vehicle off a cliff, which then immediately gets stepped on by Godzilla. Blamed by one of her peers and blaming herself, she accepts the demotion that they hand to her to work in their records department, all the while training for the day for the opportunity to face back against Godzilla and redeem herself. As the Japanese nation desperately strategizes to face off against this burgeoning and intense threat, they commission a team of genius scientists to build a weapon on the bones of the original 1954 Godzilla, turning him into the fearsome Mech Kyu, which succeeds in driving off Godzilla but not destroying him, for it suffers a fatal computer glitch that causes them to lose control of it. However, after it loses power, they find themselves the time to fix that error just in time to fight off against Godzilla's second assault, in which Akane personally pilots Kyu to not only thoroughly thrash Godzilla, one of the most satisfying kaiju brawls you'll ever see in this genre, but also to heroically save the life of the singular person that doubt her capability, and to redeem herself in his eyes for being involved in his brother's death. It ends with Godzilla sulking off into the horizon with a giant hole blown between his chest and his tail between his legs, and our hero proud in the knowledge that she is a capable defender of the Japanese nation. There's a lot to say about this movie, so let's just start off with the obvious. The story is the absolute finest part of this movie. Whereas a lot of Godzilla films generally rely on setting up the various identities of the monsters and arranging for a locale for them to brawl, with the general plot around that being exposition and with human characters to act as point-of-view characters, this is one of the few Godzilla films where the human characters are as directly involved in the plot in a fashion that not only makes sense, but is as involving to the audience as the actual spectacle itself. Akane herself has probably one of the best character arcs inside of the entirety of Toho's catalog of Godzilla films, and that's honestly not as bad as it sounds, with characters such as Miki Sagusa and even the original Dr. Serizawa himself providing some genuinely compelling human characters for their audience to root for and to shed some light and perspective on the actual story and ideas that drive these films. But Akane's story itself is a cut above almost all of them, because it faithfully and excellently utilizes the hero's journey to build a dynamic and empathetic hero. Akane herself is established at the beginning and maintained throughout the film to have a strong sense of duty, justice, and empathy, making her not only bond incredibly well with characters around her, but also to understand the perspective of those even who oppose her. It helps that the actress who plays her does an outright exceptional job in emoting the perspectives and shifting viewpoints of the character through her face, eyes, and body language. These character attributes and ideals drive a dynamic, likable, and genuinely heroic person. It convincingly and engagingly guides her on a journey from catastrophic and humiliating failure to personal vindication and victory against a legendary dragon. If there's any negative aspects to the story, there is a child character who talks about the sanctity of life and the cruelty of building a living robot warrior to fight other creatures and how both of them deserve to live. That really honestly feels like a bunch of tacked on attempts at social commentary to talk about how man is the real monster. It doesn't really fit in a story where Godzilla threatens hospitals full of innocent children. That's the story aspect of Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. What about the technical aspects? Well, if you're not familiar with the Godzilla franchise, it is one of the absolute icons of practical special effects, especially with the suitmation technique that founded the franchise and made the man who theorized the series, Eiji Tsuburaya, a legend in his own time. This film itself is an extension of that legacy, with it having some of the best suits for the stuntmen ever made. More nimble, emotive, and able to more physically brawl with each other than the more bulky and technically complex Heisei-era suits, but also combined with improved CGI and optical effects from the previous films to have better ranged fights. The actual action in this movie is some of the best that the Millennium era has to offer, with it having a healthy balance of ranged duels between Kiyu's missile and maser barrages and Godzilla's iconic atomic breath, absolutely tearing up tanks and fighter wings and knocking Mechagodzilla around like a baseball. Yet it's the brawls and the punch-outs that make this film stand out from other films in the Millennium and Heisei era. Grapples, punches, and body slams absolutely dominate how Kiyu fights. The poster for this film is not only some of the best that Godzilla had ever seen in this era, but it's also just a perfect promo for what the film actually is as a spectacle. And while it does have a lot of aged CGI effects, the practical effects such as the suits, the miniatures, and the pyrotechnics are some of the most gorgeous that the franchise has ever seen. So what is Godzilla against Mechagodzilla? It's one of the finest Godzilla films that Toho has ever made. It has great fights, a solid story, and easily one of the best human heroes that the Godzilla franchise has ever seen. If you like Godzilla films, you like action films, you like the mecha genre, you outright owe it to yourself to watch this movie. Stay golden.